So the things that I managed to learn from the Scarlet Plague. Um, in general, the story is an interesting take on a genre of the post-apocalyptic stuff. And of course, with what's been going on in the last year, it's really easy to draw parallels between a plague wiping out all of the Earth and everything that's been going on with COVID-19. Um, there were quite a few comparisons that I made just directly correlating with Grandsier's story, like the servant people, who I'm pretty certain because of the time frame we're all supposed to be African Americans. I saw quite a few parallels there with it, like the riots and the burning down of cities, because that's been a big thing in the news, pretty much the entire pandemic. There were a few things that I was like, I don't think this would be as widespread as it was in the story, but then again, I tend to look at people and think better of them rather than worse. Uh, the people just gunning everyone down in the streets once this plague has started taking over. That one I felt was extreme, but at the same time, I tend to think better of people, like I said. The story itself did put a lot in perspective, though, because as a psychology major, I totally understand that whole feeling of isolation that Grandseer felt whenever he went off on his own after literally all 400 or all the other 399 people that were with him died. And he's the only one that had this immunity to the Scarlet Plague. And so he was just by himself for so long. I completely get it. I mean, throughout this pandemic, if I hadn't been able to interact with my girlfriend as much as I had, I probably would have been going insane myself. But then again, I'm also an extrovert, so that time with other people really spurs me up. Reflecting on the kids and everything in the story of how they've gone more savage. I think it says a lot that Edwin as a character is trying to learn more from the Grandseer. He wants to learn more, and although it's more for a sort of I want to take control aspect, it is still very interesting to see that even without any other adults around, that the idea of I can learn more from the older generation is still there. And then, of course, you have Hairlip, who wants to do things his own way and hates all of this high society talk, just Grandseer using big words. And I love the ongoing gag of him hating the word scarlet because it's just a fancy word for red. So throughout the entire book, he just keeps calling it the Red Plague or the Red Disease, or I think at one point he called it the Red Death. Um, Other than that, there's a lot of correlations that can be made with how things have been going throughout the pandemic. Um, People setting up guidelines and rules of whenever Grandseer was still at the university of how they were going to keep everybody, safe and alive, and then people secretly doing their own thing and winding up spreading the disease like a wildfire. I found it really interesting that the book itself talked about the incubation period for the disease and how they hadn't even thought of that at first because of how quickly it killed. But the fact that they brought up, there's an incubation period, and then once you see it, you have like 15 minutes left to live. So I find it really interesting that, that was something that they actually focused on, especially with them correlating that to COVID-19 and how the incubation period is like 2 weeks. For his story, I think the incubation time, depending on when they actually got infected while they were at the university, was like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, which is just insane to me. There was a lot about this story that I found super interesting, but that's what happens because I prefer fiction novels. It gives you a little bit more to think about, and it's not as based in 100% true reality, but with a story like this, it's something that believably could happen, just terrifying to think about. But aside from all that, I think it was a lovely book. I would greatly recommend it to anybody that wants a nice little fiction novel to take their mind off of how the world's going right now. I included on the webpage the audiobook that I found about halfway through reading it myself. Feel free to check it out. The book itself is in public domain, so you're free to find a copy of it just about anywhere by searching and listen to the audiobook.